seated. And counsel for plaintiff may begin.
Please, the court. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a while, so let me introduce myself. My name is Greg Barnhart, and along with, move this out of the way, and you've met Jack Scarola a number of times. My client, Liz Piendle. My partner, Saya Baker. My partner, David Sayers. Normally, when a trial begins, we don't thank the jury because they haven't done their job yet. But this is an exception. For a week and a half, for most of you, you have been going through a rigorous jury selection. And you've paid attention even into the late hours of the afternoon for both counsel and both sides. And we appreciate that. And thank you. You're performing a service in the jury that dates back for 200 years, more than 200 years in the United States, and more than 1,000 years in England. It's the right to trial by jury. And as Judge Rosenberg told you before, short of serving your country in time of war, there is no more important service than you can give to your fellow citizens, to the state of Florida, and to the United States of America. Now, folks, we are here because of the death of a fine man. And you will hear no other evidence in this case other than that. Charlie Piendle was a good husband, a good father, a good and loyal friend, and a good man. He endured a number of things in his life, as you'll hear. And he endured them stoically, with dignity, and with courage. Charlie Piendle was born in 1941, before we entered World War II. Charlie Piendle started smoking in the 6th or 7th grade, according to his best friend, whom you'll hear in this courtroom. That was well before any warnings were ever placed on cigarettes. Charlie Piendle started smoking he started smoking in the 6th or 7th grade, so it had been in the early 50s. In 1995, Charlie Piendle was diagnosed with cancer. In 1996, a year later, he died of that disease. Charlie started smoking when his brain was immature, when he was a kid, even a pre-teenager. And he smoked until he was in his late 40s. And that's what you'll hear in this case. Now, Charlie, as I said, was immature. He started smoking cigarettes when he was younger. And he started smoking cigarettes when the nicotine levels were 3 times as high as they are now. And you've heard the court. You go ahead and show us. You've heard the court talk about a class action. In 1994, the year before Charlie Piendle was diagnosed with lung cancer, the Engle class action was started. It filed, you can see from the slide up there. It continued on, and it was tried in front of a jury like you in Miami. And from there, it wended its way up to the Florida Supreme Court. And down came the findings that you've heard about so far in jury selection. The wheels of justice grind slowly. But that is where we are in 2010. This is an Engle class case. You have to determine, first of all, was Charlie Piendle a member of the class? And did he die because of his addiction to nicotine and smoking cigarettes? When we filed this case, the very first pleading, the very first paper in this lawsuit that was filed, the Piendle family admitted that Charlie Piendle shares responsibility. He shares responsibility for his own death, for allowing himself to become addicted, for allowing himself to become part of the addiction process at a time when he was in 6th or 7th or 8th or 9th grade, when he ultimately became addicted, whenever that was, long before he had ever heard of the word addiction or the addiction process or the cycle of addiction or anything else. Even though he knew nothing about that, he allowed himself to smoke. But the defendants did know about the addictive process of nicotine. They did know about the dangers of cigarettes, and they kept it secret. This is a case you'll find about responsibility, as most cases are. Charlie accepts his responsibility. He did some things he shouldn't have done. He was a weak, normal human being. As a kid, he gave in to peer group pressure. He smoked with everybody else. His parents smoked. His brothers and sisters smoked. His friends' parents smoked. The older kids smoked. He was barraged with advertisements, but he chose to begin to smoke. It's a different time, but he did. So Charlie accepts his responsibility, but the cigarette companies deny any. Not one bit. Not one iota. It's all Charlie's fault. Now, what we're going to find, we're going to go back through what the companies knew and when they knew it. And we're going to compare what Charlie knew in the addiction process with what the cigarette companies, R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris, knew at the time, what they did or what they didn't do about it. Well, first of all, the defendants found out decades ago, that their products were addictive, that nicotine was addictive. They found out decades ago, in the 1950s, that their products kill when they are used as they are intended to be used, when the cigarettes are smoked. And rather than come clean, they kept it secret and engaged in a plan with others, a plan to keep it secret and to keep America smoking. One teenager at a time. So these were the defendants' choices. Charlie made a choice, and these are the defendants' choices. First, they chose not to come clean when they knew information that was vital to the health and the safety of their customers. They chose to conceal information, vital information. They chose to cover up information. Nicotine is addictive. We're selling nicotine, and you'll see this in a moment. They chose to cover up, to deny that their products caused people to get sick. They chose to deny that their products caused people to die. They chose to cover up, and they chose to fight. And you'll hear evidence of a concealment. A group of tobacco companies getting together, coming up with a plan that was in effect for over 50 years. Really, right up until the year 2000. They fought the Surgeon General as part of that plan. And the Surgeon General is the highest ranking healthcare official in the country. And the Surgeon General from time to time will issue reports. And these reports are culled from the most learned and the most well-known medical authorities. And they're both based upon the most rigorous research. The most rigorous research. And they bring in the top guns in their fields to write the Surgeon General's reports, to criticize it, and to handle different parts of it. And instead of cooperating with the Surgeon General, instead of coming clean and telling the Surgeon General what the tobacco companies knew, what their own scientists knew, what their own scientists had discovered, and what their executives knew, they chose to do what? They chose to fight the Surgeon General on each report. Every time, and you'll see this, every time the Surgeon General came out with a report, there was a propaganda barrage, a publicity campaign to disprove it, to deny it, to create doubt. Every health announcement, major health announcement, from the National Cancer Society, the American Medical Association, if it got publicity, there was a barrage of publicity, a campaign to deny it, to fight it. There was a constant drumbeat that was tied in with marketing. And here was the drumbeat. It's not proven. It's okay. It's not addictive. It's just a choice. You can do it. A constant drumbeat of information. Deny, deny, deny. And this plan, their plan, we'll find out later, was in their own terms, by their own words, not my words, brilliantly conceived and executed. And this is looking retrospectively. The tobacco company's looking back 20 years after their plan was concocted or hatched, talking about how well they had done. So what's that led to? I mean, what's the result of all this? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's led to this. An epidemic of addiction. It's led to 440,000 deaths a year.
Your Honor, object to the grounds of due process, Williams versus State Farm, and your eliminator rulings.
440,000 Americans a year die of healthcare-related diseases, cigarette-related diseases, nicotine-related diseases, not just lung cancer, heart disease, COPD, esophageal cancer, bladder cancer, pancreatic cancer, a whole host of cancers. 440,000 Americans each year, every year. Dolphin Stadium in Miami holds about 75,000 people. We did some math last night. Imagine the first 5 games are sellouts. Every single person in that stadium dies. 5 times. And then another half game. Each year, every year, because of the success of the plan that was hatched, in part, and carried out by R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris and others. So, what was their plan? Addict one person, one teenager, one smoker at a time, and keep them smoking. Keep them smoking. And why would you do that? Why, for goodness sakes? The evidence will show for money. For money. And there's nothing wrong with making a profit in the United States of America. That's the American way. But what is wrong, the evidence will show, is making a profit when it kills and hurts people. And you shouldn't do it. All right. So we need to go back in time. Because nowadays, this is a different situation. We live in a different world than Charlie grew up in. Back in the 1940s, everyone smoked. It was a different time. If this case had been tried in the 1940s, we wouldn't be in this courtroom. We'd be in that little memorial courtroom across the street. But what would be different is we would never have a female judge. But everybody would be smoking. It's jarring, isn't it? Take out a cigarette. That doesn't happen anymore. But what would have happened back then is this. The court would have been smoking. The judge would have been smoking. Lawyers would be smoking. I might well have been smoking during my opening statement. There would have been ashtrays. Members of the jury would have been smoking. And people in the audience would have been smoking. It was our way of life. And who smoked? When I say everyone, everyone. People smoked in the hospital. People smoked on airplanes. Stewardesses and flight attendants, we didn't have male flight attendants back then, gave out cigarettes as favors. Doctors smoked. Business leaders smoked. People in schools smoked. Let's go ahead, Keith. And this is sort of the way we look back. And if you could remember, many of you are too young to remember, but some of you aren't. Nurses would smoke in the cafeteria in the hospital. Members of the clergy would smoke, priests and rabbis. They smoked with their families. Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers in a major game, pacing the sidelines. And what's he doing? Smoke. Golfing. Arnold Palmer in the middle of a match. Smoking. The New York City Orchestra in the middle of a concert. Smoking. People traveling. Smoking. And let's think about who was smoking when Charlie started. So he starts in the early 1950s. And so who smoked? All the leaders in town. The people he respected the most. His parents, the parents of his friends, the older boys and girls on down the street, his teachers. He was a religious man, a religious boy. His priests, his coaches, except for one. His firemen, the policemen, the leaders of the community. Everybody smoked. And nobody thought anything about it, because that's the way life was. Well, how was it different? How do we get our information? Well, first of all, this is a day of skepticism, right? People back then were much more trusting. We had just come out of World War II. The United States of America had won the war. People trusted corporations. People trusted the government. They were held in much higher esteem. It wasn't the same now, where people question all the time. There weren't computers, there weren't blogs, there weren't people on TV all the time having shouting matches. That just didn't happen. And this is the time in which Charlie grew up. How did we communicate back then? Well, with the written word. Newspapers, magazines were really big, and radio. TV didn't come until the 1950s. And then, believe it or not, movies, because during the movies they would have newsreels where people would see what was going on. Now, back in the movies, everybody could smoke. They didn't just have smoking sections. Everybody smoked. So what do we have? We had cigarette ads everywhere. And why did we do that? Because cigarette advertising, as we'll see in a moment, was a trigger to this process, this culture, where almost everybody smoked. All right, let's go to the ads. If you could, Keith. All right, well, let's pick out some of the things that Charlie and other kids and other people would have seen. Who was it that was targeted? Who were the kinds of people that would sell the most? People that were heroes, right? Sports heroes, movie stars, doctors, rugged men, square job men, men's men, beautiful women, cool people, sophisticated people, grown-ups, the kind of people you want to be like. I don't know if anybody recognizes this athlete. This is Roy Campanella. At the time, probably the most famous baseball player, or at least one of them, of his era. See some of the doctor ads, Keith, if you could. No one had worries about smoking, because not only did doctors smoke regularly, what happened was that doctors' smoking and the health benefits were advertised in magazines and newspapers. Here's Lucky's. Actually, Lucky Strikes were among the first cigarettes that Charlie started smoking. 21,000 physicians roughly say Lucky's are less irritating. Throat protection. Can you go back for a minute? I'll tell you what. Throat protection. I mean, the health hazard back then was a sore throat. It was easier to smoke. How about this? This looks like Dr. Marcus Welby, if anybody can remember that TV show. Kind, gentle doctor. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. And why is it good for you? Because your T-zone will tell you. T for taste and T for throat. It doesn't hurt. I don't have a sore throat. No one worried about lung cancer. It wasn't considered. It was a sore throat. Let's show a couple more, Keith, and then we'll move. So, let's show a couple of the movie stars. I mean, remember back then, movie stars were icons. Much more so than they are today. I mean, there were fewer of them. They were in movie after movie after movie, and everybody knew their own. Jack Benny, Lucky Strikes. Jack Benny's giving. The shtick was, he was cheap. Cartons of Luckies to a few close friends, and what's the image? Hundreds of cartons of Lucky Strikes to give to people. You recognize that handsome actor. Our former president, President Reagan, is here. That's back when he was an actor, of course. And he was giving cartons of cigarettes, according to the ad, to all of his friends. And that's the era that we had. Let's do one more about some of the good-looking girls and the good-looking boys that had this. Because, remember, when Charlie started, he was just a kid. This is one that another lucky strike at. This is one that appealed directly to both boys and girls. For boys, I mean, look at her, she's gorgeous. For girls, she's beautiful. And she's sophisticated. And she's got a ticket to the 1952 prom. It's the kind of image that was used to attract teens who have a fragile self-image. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, by the 1950s, 80%, oh, I forgot this. These are my favorite. These came a little bit later, but Babe Ruth Cabral, who is Charlie's best friend, said they all wanted to be like the Marlboro Man. Marlboro used to be a woman's cigarette, and through mass marketing, they changed it to a rugged, individualistic, pure American, square-jawed, tough, the independent spirit that conquered the West. That's Marlboro. And that's how you will be, as a teenager, if you smoke Marlboro. All right. Now, by the 1950s, the statistics are nearly 80% of all men in the United States smoke. Fewer women did back then, but more men. And why is that? Think about it. In the early 1950s, we were 5 years out of World War II. Millions and millions of men and women went into the service. And what did they get in their rations? Free cigarettes. Hershey bars and cigarettes. Free. They used them for currency. And so men in stress, in trouble, in time of danger, with free cigarettes, who knows what would happen, became hooked. Addicted. By the millions. And so that by the 50s, nearly 80% of all men were smoking. And even more younger men. All right. So, as I said, that includes the veterans back from the war. It included the most respected people in town, and it included parents. It included your parents. They smoked too. Smoking, as I said, was a part, and we will prove this to you, but we can't emphasize it even more. Smoking was a part of our life. It was a part of our everyday life. And to do justice in the case, to understand the evidence, to put it through the prism of time, we need to go back. We need to go back. And we need to see life, to visualize life as it was back then. Not as it is now, 2010. Well before many of you were born. Okay, so that brings us to 1950s. Now, in the 1950s, go ahead, Keith, we had some disturbing studies. And some disturbing studies were coming out by medical scientists. And here's what the studies showed. That there was a direct link between smoking and lung cancer. And the reason for that is that lung cancer rates skyrocketed. Skyrocketed. In the early 1900s, lung cancer was so rare it was unheard of. In fact, one of the most famous doctors of his time, Dr. Ochsner, who formed the Ochsner Clinic in New Orleans, was roused out of his bed by one of his professors in the middle of the night because they were doing an autopsy on a person who had lung cancer. And the professor said, "You'll probably never see another case of this for the rest of your life. It's so rare." Well, unfortunately, he saw a lot more. So, some disturbing studies started to come out. And they linked lung cancer to smoking. And then a study wasn't any better than the others, but it got a lot of publicity. And a young professor, a young scientist, decided to paint the bats and mice with cigarette talk. And sure enough, the mice developed, they grew tumors. This is important. They grew tumors, and that particular study, the mice were growing cancerous tumors from cigarette talk, received a tremendous amount of publicity. It was picked up in the Reader's Digest, and the Reader's Digest back then was a big newspaper, a big magazine, and people read it. And so it got a lot of publicity, and it was on the radio. TV was in its infancy, but they started to have TV programs. And that led to a sales decline. The very first sales decline for tobacco since the Great Depression. The very first. And so the tobacco executives were alarmed. They were scared. They had to do something. And so they did. And when you'll hear the time of this meeting, you'll see how concerned they were. They had an emergency Christmas Eve meeting at the Plaza Hotel in 1953. Now, these competitors, Philip Morris, RJR, and the other tobacco companies, were bitter rivals. They were fierce rivals. They spent millions and millions of dollars for market share. The competition was tough and it was keen. And yet they were all so concerned that they linked arms with each other and they came to the Plaza Hotel on Christmas Eve. Instead of spending Christmas Eve with their families, the condition, the threat was so dire, they met in the hotel. And what did they do? Well, did they bring their scientists? Did they bring the Surgeon General? Did they bring famous doctors and specialists? No. They made a choice. And their choice was to hire the best public relations firm they could. Because the problem they saw, the evidence will show, was not a health problem. Even though the rates of lung cancer were skyrocketing, the problem they saw was a money problem, a sales problem. And so they brought public relations people instead of doctors. All right, so what happened there? Well, we can't show you this yet. Here it is. You might trust you, I'll read it. I can't show you this, but the evidence yet. But we can hear it, we can read it. So what happened is they hired a public relations firm by the name of Hill and Knowlton. Hill and Knowlton, the very best New York City had. And so Hill and Knowlton made a memo, an internal memo, and it talked about what all the CEOs and the executives of the tobacco companies wanted to do and did at that emergency meeting. And here's what they said. You'll get from them little real information about lung cancer, of course. Pro or con, but you'll find some mighty interesting opinions. One of the men said, it's fortunate for us that cigarettes are a habit they can't break. Who's that? The smokers. It's fortunate for us that cigarettes are a habit they can't break. 1953, they knew that cigarettes were addictive. Said another, boy, wouldn't it be wonderful if our company were the first to produce a cancer-free cigarette? They knew their products caused cancer. What we could do to the competition. Not how many lives could we save, but what could we do to gather more market share? Said another. Suppose everybody smoked just one cigarette less a day. That would be maybe $40 billion a year. Billion. This resulted in what's called what they call a forwarding memo, and we talked a little bit about it. And here is what the public relations firm came up with. They said there's only one problem. Confidence. Not health. Not people dying. There's only one problem, and that's confidence. And how to establish it. Public assurance. Assure the nervous public. And how to create it. In perhaps a long interim when scientific doubts must remain. And most important, how to free millions of Americans from the guilty fear that is going to arise deep in their biological depths. You'll like this one. Regardless of any poo-pooing logic every time they light a cigarette. Let's talk about that. How do you free people from feeling anxious when they light a cigarette, regardless of any logic? How do we make them feel better about it? That's our mission. That's our goal. Assuage their anxiety. So, what they did, all of the tobacco companies did, is they came up through their public relations firm with what they call a frank statement. Frank statement. It wasn't named after anybody named Frank. It was something that was supposed to be forward, straightforward, open and honest, a frank statement. It was published in 248 newspapers, the 248 largest newspapers in our country. It was on the radio, it was in magazines, and it was repeated again and again and again. And here's what they said. Remember, we know what they told their public relations people. Addictive, cause cancer. But here's what they told the public. Distinguished authorities point out. Number one, that medical research of recent years indicates many possible causes of lung cancer. Well, what do you mean by that? It means not cigarettes. That there is no proof, and you'll hear those words again and again in their documents, that cigarette smoking is one of the causes. No proof. We believe the products we make are not injurious to health. And yet, we'll see that they had their own scientists knew that cigarettes cause lung cancer. And at the very same time, they're telling the public, through a massive public relations blast, we believe the products we make are not injurious to health. And then finally, they give us some reassurance. We always have and always will cooperate closely with those whose task it is to safeguard the public health. We will work hand in glove with doctors. We will help out the Surgeon General. And what they'll tell you is they sent some cigarettes for some research, they did this and that, but really what they tried to do is cover up, to fight the Surgeon General at every turn. And of course, they had resources to do it, the Surgeon General did not. Okay, so what they did is, in very real terms, they devised a plan that was carried out for the next 50 years. And what a plan it was. What a plan it was. It was a plan of disinformation, a plan of propaganda, not my word, their words. A plan of reassurance, reassure an anxious public. And a plan to keep us smoking. Keep us smoking. Sell the cigarettes. Come hell or high water, we don't care about the health risks. Keep us smoking. And fight all news. So look, they can't control the Surgeon General's report. They can't control medical scientists from publishing things. And they knew that from time to time there was going to be more outcry. They couldn't control the news, but they could fight it. And they could fight it with the $10 to $15 million a day they spent on advertising. A day. Because they have resources beyond which we cannot imagine. So, that was a choice they made. R.J. Reynolds, Philip Morris, and others. They made that choice before Charlie Piendle ever picked up a cigarette. Charlie Piendle made a decision as a kid, a child really. This was a decision they made as adults. So, to understand, though, really what's going on in this case, to understand the background, we have to understand the role of addiction. Keith, go ahead and put that up. To do that, though, we have to understand the jury verdict form. And Judge Rosenberg told you that. So this will work together. One of the questions that you'll answer was Charles Piendle addicted to cigarettes containing nicotine manufactured by R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris? And if so, was such addiction a legal cause of his lung cancer and death? Now, in the jury form, they'll have two questions, one for Philip Morris, one for RJR, but I squeeze them together in respect. That's the question. Was he addicted to cigarettes containing nicotine, and was his addiction a legal cause? Not the only cause. I mean, we've admitted one of the causes was a decision that Charlie Piendle takes blame for. His decision to start when he was a kid. He also takes blame for this. He was a normal, weak human being. He was addicted, and it was tough to quit. And he was not able to quit despite a number of attempts until he was in his late 40s. Didn't have a threatening disease, but he finally, after 5 attempts, was able to quit. All right, let's go to the next one. The question is, what else contributed other than Charlie? Well, the things that contributed other than Charlie were these. A plan by tobacco to hook teenagers. A plan by tobacco to keep us smoking. A plan by tobacco to make it hard for us to quit. A plan by tobacco to make it so that we relax. So that we relax. So that when we would quit for a day or 2 or 3, and then we couldn't stop. The craving would take over. And that was a plan that was carried on again and again and again. Okay, so did addiction contribute? We'll talk about addiction right now. Don't take my word for it. You're going to hear evidence from the witness stand, and you'll see evidence. And what's the evidence going to be? We're going to bring some doctors to you who are truly world-class physicians. Dr. Neil Benowitz teaches at the University of California, San Francisco. He has published over 350 research papers. This is peer-reviewed research papers, the kind that you submit to a prestigious journal, hopefully, and other scientists, other doctors look it over to make sure that it has the right stuff. 350. He's published in the most prestigious journals. Because there are journals and then there are journals. The New England Medical Journal, the Journal of the AMA, the Journal of Toxicology. He is an authority in his field, the leading authority. He is a senior scientist, also called upon. Remember we talked about the Surgeon General who does the Surgeon General reports? They call upon the leading experts in the country to help author these Surgeon General reports. And they vet them. They make sure their research is right. They make sure their publications are accurate. Dr. Benowitz was in charge, one of the senior scientists, he wasn't the only one, in charge of writing the conclusion of the Surgeon General reports of the United States of America when it comes to nicotine and addiction. David Burns is a pulmonologist from California. He published chapters in the 2 most leading textbooks used in medical school for internal medicine, Harrison's and Cecil's. He used those when he was a medical student at Harvard, and students at Harvard and every other medical school that I know of are using those textbooks. Except now, they have 2 chapters written by Dr. Burns on addiction, on cancer, and on nicotine. Let's go to the next one. Dr. Michael Cummings is a PhD doctor. He's with the Roswell Park Cancer Institute, and he specializes in addiction treatment, and he is a published author many times. He was asked by the Surgeon General of the United States to contribute to the 1988 Surgeon General's report, again, on nicotine and its addictive properties. Now, Dr. William Perrone is a PhD. He's a former scientist at Philip Morris, and he has some insight. Well, he has his own opinion about what went on. We'll talk about that Testify. Okay, so let's get back to the addiction process. The addiction process is a cycle. And what happens is it's not just tobacco and nicotine. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens is people start to experiment, usually kids, and they start to experiment with something that is habitual, something that can cause addiction. And since we're talking about nicotine, which it's nicotine in this case, and at that point there's choice, of course. There's no one's holding a gun to your head as a kid to do something. But what happens is, as you leave the experimental line and work down the regular use line, particularly in a child, your brain changes. There are actual changes to the human brain, and that's particularly profound in a child. Because a teenager, our brains, are not mature until we're in our early 20s. So a teenager may be physically mature, maybe their height and their weight where they're going to be, but their brains are not mature. Just why teenagers do so many dumb things. It's a completely different situation with kids. And one of the areas that is not fully mature, as we all know, for kids, teenagers, is the judgment center. So what happens is that as you continue to use a substance, you become habituated to it, you become attended to it, and then you start to use it on a daily basis, you develop a physical dependence on it, a physical addiction to it. And it's just a cycle. It continues and continues, and then there's a point beyond which you tend to lose a lot of your choice. And that doesn't mean that your choice is completely wiped out. It doesn't mean that you're brainwashed or you're a zombie. But it means that you've become addicted. All right. We heard from some of you that there's such a thing as a social smoker, where people smoke a pack a month, smoke some on the weekend, don't need them on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever. Well, that happens. It clearly happens. But that's unusual with cigarettes. That's unusual with nicotine. It's not unusual with alcohol. With alcohol, a social drinker is far more common. It's less than 10% of people who use alcohol become physically dependent, become addicted to it. Less than 10%. With cigarettes and nicotine, it's far, far, far higher. All right, now, the process is different for everybody. Some people, some lucky people, can use nicotine and not become addicted. But there aren't many. The vast majority of people who use it, and use it on a daily basis, become addicted because of changes in the brain. Cigarettes, as I said, are different, and we talked about the brain changes. And Keith, could you show us the brain changes, if you would, please? This is Dr. Denney has done research on the brain. And what we can see in the upper slide is the frontal cortex, which is this part of your brain, the front part of your brain, in a non-smoker. And then in a smoker, there are actual nicotinic receptor changes. That is, there are physical changes in the brain which the brain uses to respond to nicotine. They happen also in hippocampus, which is in the middle of the brain. And one of the reasons that it's so difficult, so doggone difficult, to quit smoking is because our brain has changed. And the brain changes that occur when someone starts smoking as a teenager, when their brains are immature, are ever so much greater than when they start as an adult. Think about it. A 12, a 13, a 14-year-old kid, when they start to smoke regularly, their brains are developing bathed in nicotine. And that changes their brain forever. And the brain changes up forever. You can stop smoking, but that's one of the reasons they have such a high relapse rate, because the brain has changed. It's very easy to get back on track. Okay. So, that brings us to addiction by design. You will hear during this trial about changes to the cigarette. The cigarette is not just a weed, tobacco, and rolled together and then smoked. It's engineered. And what the companies have done is change it. They've manipulated it. They've added chemical compounds to the tobacco to make it easier to inhale. So what's the problem? Anybody who started smoking as a kid could remember, most people have a pretty bad reaction. You cough, you choke, you don't feel well. And that's because the human lungs are not designed to have hot smoke sucked in. We have a cough response which protects the lungs. And so substances are added to the tobacco to make it easier to inhale so we don't cough. They've added flavoring compounds for taste, for smoothness, and bronchodilation. Anybody who has asthma know that when you have an asthma attack, you do an inhaler. It's a bronchodilator. It dilates the bronchial tree of your lungs. And so what they have is they have bronchodilation to overcome the aversion to inhaling. Because what they want is for you to inhale deeply. That's how you get the nicotine dose. They control the burn rate of the cigarette, so it doesn't burn too fast, so that you get all the nicotine doses you can get. They control the ventilation, and they do things to the paper. They control the smoke concentration, and most importantly, they control the nicotine level to keep it above the addiction threshold. It was higher years ago, but they control it, they titrate it, in scientific terms, so that with the 8 to 10 puffs per cigarette, the smoking addict, the person who's addicted, gets the nicotine doses they want, so they keep coming back to that particular brand. All right. One of the things, so what does nicotine do in our brains? Okay? Nicotine enhances our pleasure. It directly affects the pleasure reward centers. Some people have heard about dopamine, endorphins. Those are pleasure centers. So if you like chocolate and you eat a piece of chocolate cake, you get dopamine released. You get hormones released by your brain. Runners sometimes get the runner's high. Hormones, dopamine, are released by the brain. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. But what happens is that if this pleasure release center is overstimulated, if it's bathed in nicotine, the hormones are released and released and released. So someone who's smoking 2 packs a day, and for you non-smokers, a pack of cigarettes has 20 cigarettes, whatever my pack was. 20 cigarettes. And each cigarette, when you smoke it, has about 8 to 10 puffs. Each puff is a dose of nicotine. Not my words, their words. So, instead of having a piece of chocolate cake, or 2, and having 2 impulses sent to your brain, and 2 releases from your pleasure center, the brain is overwhelmed. It gets 360 doses. It's bombarded with pleasure releases. And nicotine does. It releases a lot of pleasure hormones. And so what does the body do? Our body is a wonderful machine. It seeks equilibrium. If you eat too much salt, the body seeks equilibrium. The body seeks equilibrium in the brain too. And what it does is it tones down the hormone release overload. And that's a very important part of the addiction process. It tones it down. And that brings us, whoops, I'm sorry, I forgot this one. Could you go back to our smoker? Thank you. So what happens is we have enhanced nicotine, and we talked about what it does to the brain. And this is an illustration of what it does. We have an engineered, if you will, cigarette. The smoker smokes it. It goes directly into the lungs. And the lungs are the most vascular organ we have. That's where we get oxygen to all the other organs in our body. Within seconds, the nicotine is sucked in, and within 5 seconds of your puff, of your dose, the nicotine goes directly to the brain, which causes the release of pleasure hormones. The more enhanced, the more receptors. The more receptors, the greater the addiction. Permanent changes to the brain if you keep it up. Okay, so let's go to our next slide if you would. We have an addiction cycle, and there are physical effects and there are psychological effects. And what are the physical effects? The brain changes, and we saw that in the slide that we saw. It reduces the production of pleasure hormones. It seeks equilibrium. Why? Because you're getting so many pleasure hormone releases every time you take a dose of nicotine. It increases your tolerance. And what tolerance is, it's defined really as when the brain tones down the pleasure hormones. And that causes a craving, a compulsion to have more. Because since our brain, since the equilibrium has been toned down, since we don't have the normal amount of pleasure hormones circulating in our brain, our body craves it. Our body craves more nicotine. And so we smoke. And we smoke. And we get it back. And we feel pleasure. And then we smoke again. And it goes down. And we smoke again. So, the body smokes to keep the levels up, and it's a vicious cycle. It continues and it continues. But let's talk about when we take nicotine out of the system. Because it's easy to quit. It's very easy to quit. People quit 1,000 times. It's just hard to stay quit. And here's why. Because nicotine, on the positive side, relaxes, it stimulates, provides better concentration, and people like it. It's pleasurable. But it's a drug. And so what happens is, when you smoke and you get your dose, you have these positive responses. And as you go longer and longer without the drug of nicotine, what happens? You build up a compulsion, but the symptoms of withdrawal, which come from a lack of our pleasure hormones, are these. Anxiety. I'm anxious. I'm scared. I feel bad. I feel creepy. Tense. I'm tense. I'm on edge. Some people feel sick of their stomach. Some people get headaches. Some people can't concentrate. They're agitated. They're crabby. They're irritable. And it gets worse and worse the longer they go. So, why do we have so few social smokers compared to social drinkers? Because of this. I mean, there are other reasons too, but the main reason is the addictive effect, the rate of addiction of nicotine. Okay. People who aren't addicted, as I said, they don't do things compulsively. People who are addicted do. Let's go ahead and change it. And the psychological effects, and these are in many ways, they go hand in glove. They're just as important. The physical effects we saw. What are the psychological effects? I want it. I want to have a smoke. I don't feel well. I'm tense. I'm scared. When I say scared, I mean anxious about a situation when you would be put in the smoking situation when you try and quit. And you heard that from some of your fellow jurors there. How many times they tried to quit and how bad they felt when they were there. Denial and rationalization, and then relapse. And let's talk about denial and rationalization. What is denial? It's not a river in Africa. Denial is, I don't believe it. And it's not that they're intellectually not seeing it. It's a crutch. It's, I can stop. They don't recognize the addiction. I can stop. I just don't want to. I will stop. Just not right now. I won't smoke for very long. I'm only going to smoke for a while. I'm not going to smoke till I'm old. I'll quit long before I get sick. I like it. It's just a choice, says tobacco. It's just a choice. You can quit any time. Just use a little motivation. I'll quit when the stress is over, whatever it may be. My exams, my job, my marriage, I'll quit when the stress is over. But it's like I mean, one of the things that is the fundamental bedrock of Alcoholics Anonymous is that every time a person comes to a meeting, they have to get up and say, I'm Greg Barnhart and I'm an alcoholic. Why? Because they recognize denial and rationalization. Because otherwise, even if you quit drinking for years, you can say, hey, it was the 4th of July, I'll just have a few beers. I can handle it. I will stop. I like it. I won't do it very long. And then I'm back into it. And that's how denial and rationalization smokers. So, what are the classic signs of addiction? Denial and rationalization. Denial and rationalization. Well, how is addiction a cause of death? Does nicotine cause cancer? Nicotine causes addiction, which causes cancer. And how does it do it? Let's go to dose response. Remember we talked about the social smoker that we heard about in jury selection? Somebody who really doesn't smoke very much, like a pack a month. Over 1 pack per month, a few cigarettes during the weekend. Don't need a cigarette Monday through Friday, and I'll just smoke some. A lot of times people don't even know I'm smoking. So, a pack per month over 30 years is 240 cigarettes a year. That's take about an average of 8 to 10 puffs a cigarette, about 9. And so that's about 65,000 lifetime exposures to the smoke that comes into your lungs. Okay? It's not good for you. The lungs are not happy about it, and we shouldn't do it. But you'll find out from the medical experts who will testify that it takes a lot longer than that to seriously cause you to be at risk for lung cancer. A lot more than that. But an addicted smoker, on the other hand, someone who smokes 2 packs a day for over 30 years, and Charles smoked for over 30 years, smoked 2 packs a day sometimes, pack and a half, he smoked a little less as he was trying to quit. That's 14,600 cigarettes a year. And how much in lifetime exposure? About 4 million doses of cigarette smoke. So what's the difference between a social smoker and an addicted smoker? How does addiction cause cancer? The lung tissue here is not happy, but it's still healthy. The lung tissue for an addicted smoker is changed. It mutates. This is the way the cancer starts. So it takes years and years and years, but constant, repeated exposure causes change in our cells, mutations, and that leads to lung cancer. Okay. Now, let's go, if we could, to how tobacco works in the United States. So, tobacco consumption in the United States, and this is really very interesting. When Christopher Columbus crossed the ocean, Native Americans were smoking peace pipes. Tobacco has been around for hundreds of years. Christopher Columbus took it back over across the ocean. But the kinds of things they used tobacco for were chewing tobacco, cigars, and pipes, for the most part. Cigarettes, up until 1910 or so, were almost unheard of. I mean, they're very, very, very rarely used. It was other kinds. And there's a big difference between the use of pipes and cigars and things like that. People don't inhale. The nicotine receptors, it doesn't go into the lungs. I mean, some people occasionally do, but people with a cigar and a pipe keep it in their mouths, and they blow it out. Well, we can see in 1910, cigarette smoking took a dramatic rise. And here's why. In 1910, what did we have in the United States? Mass production. Mass production. For the very first time, companies, could mass produce cigarettes instead of rolling their own. We also had the introduction of matches. I mean, believe it or not, people used to have to light their pipes and their cigars and they made a cigarette, either from a gas lamp or a fireplace or something like that. Matches, mass production. And what else came about that time? Mass marketing. mass markets. And so let's look at some milestones over time. World War I, we'll see a significant increase. Why? General Pershing wanted cigarettes for his men. We see the Great Depression. It continues to rise. But then, remember I talked earlier about how times were so tough, people couldn't afford cigarettes. So there was a drop right here. Thank you. And then we see the advent of World War II. And you can see a huge spike. You can go right up the slope of that. A huge spike in World War II. And that's because cigarettes were part of your rations. We see the Korean War. And then we see in 1950 the first reports linking lung cancer to cigarette smoke. And remember the emergency meeting in 1953? That's when this took place. The reports came out, and cigarette consumption declined. And it was so worrisome to the tobacco executive, that they gave up Christmas Eve to meet in an emergency meeting at the Plaza Hotel to hash a plan. So, in 1954, 12 to 13-year-old Charlie Piendle smokes his first cigarette. In 1959, he's 18. He graduates from high school. His dream is to be a Marine. A tough, rugged Marine, and he joins the Marine Corps. You'll find that Charlie has some health problems, and that dream is dashed. But Charlie Piendle, right here, is right on the slope where everybody smoked. And then in 1986, after a number of quit attempts, Charlie Piendle is finally able to break the addiction cycle. He's in his 40s. 89. I'm sorry, 89, you're right. And then in 1995, when he's 54 years old, some people may think that at 54 you have one foot in the grave. But 54 is pretty young. At 54 years old, after smoking for more than 30 years, he's diagnosed with lung cancer. 1 year later, in 1996, Charlie dies. Now, one of the things that caused medical scientists to be so alarmed in the 1920s and 30s was this. This blue graph right here is the graph we showed you before. That's the cigarette consumption. And then over to the right is the rate in lung cancer. And you can show a shocking relationship between these. Smoking rate, lung cancer rate. But there's a gap, right? Of 20 or 30 years. As you go up. And why is that? Because of the dose response. It takes millions and millions of cigarette inhalations to actually cause the lung tissue to mutate. And so the people who do that, who smoke for years and years and years, are those people who are okay. And that brings us back to 1953, when the 50-year plan was hatched to fight and deny. And then they came up with what is going to be their drumbeat, their approach, their message. The studies are biased. They're not proven. Cigarettes are not addictive. It's just a choice. So, the question then becomes one for you to determine. What did the defendants know about addiction causing cancer? And when did they know it? What did they know? And when did they know it? And you'll have that's very important for the issues you're going to decide in this case. In terms of responsibility and in terms of exposure to damages and punishment. What did they know? When did they know it? Well, let's find out. From their own documents. In 1953, we have a survey of cancer research done by a scientist for RJR. 1953. February 1953. 10 months before Christmas Eve. February 1953. A survey done by a man who will become the head of research at R.J. Reynolds. And what does he determine? In a memo that circulated to the top brass, studies of clinical data tend to confirm the relationship between heavy and prolonged tobacco smoking and the incidence of cancer of the lung. Studies of clinical data tend to confirm the relationship between heavy and prolonged use of tobacco and cancer of the lung. And then he has a bibliography. And he quotes or cites 24 scientific studies in his bibliography from the leading medical journals of the time in the United States and in England. The Journal of Cancer, Journal of the Medical Association, and so on and so forth. February 1953. The 7/8 RJR. Okay? That brings us up a little further. And then we have another research scientist whom you'll hear about, Dr. Rajman. And he goes through and talks about different hydrocarbons. And he says, in view of our data, it's logical to assume that the carcinic activity of cigarette smoke concentrate is due to the presence of one or more carcinogenic aromatic hydrocarbons. And I'm getting tongue-tied for that. But here's what it says, essentially. Cigarette cancer, lung cancer is coming from one of 5 compounds that we've determined. That is, the cancer activity comes from one of 5 compounds. We don't know which one, but we know the cancer activity comes from one of them. In other words, they know it was cancer causing. Well, here's a 1958 survey of all the tobacco company research people. And with one exception, this reporter writes, the individuals, and these are scientists in the tobacco companies, the individuals whom we met believed that smoking causes lung cancer. With one exception, the individuals whom we met, the scientists of the tobacco companies, believed that smoking causes lung cancer. 1956. And then they come down to a conclusion. Although there remains some doubt as to the preparation of the total lung cancer mortality, scientific opinion in the USA does not now seriously doubt that the statistical correlation is real and reflects a cause and effect relationship. Smoking causes the effect of lung cancer. Scientific opinion in the USA does not seriously doubt that. 1956. Charlie's a kid. 1961. RJR. Philip Morris. What did they know? There's a review published. There are biologically active materials present in cigarette tobacco, and these are A, cancer-causing, B, cancer-promoting, C, poisonous. A, cancer-causing, B, cancer-promoting, C, poisonous. Oh, and D, stimulating, pleasurable, and flavorful. So, what did they do? This information was in their vaults. This information did not come through the suggestion box. It wasn't made by a secretary. It wasn't made by the receptionist. These are their leading researchers. This information went to the top brass. So, what did they do? Did they come out and say, Surgeon General, let's try and find a way to stop it? Did they disclose it to their consumers, as they said they would do back in 1953?
Objection, Your Honor, this is argument.
The evidence will show that they did nothing but continue the same message. Our products don't harm you. there's no proof of any link to cancer. But they're scientists, and they continue to fight. That was the public message. This was the private message. So, 1961, we have another memorandum. What did they know about addiction? They're talking about more studies, and this happens to be an R.J. Reynolds scientist. The majority of these studies incriminate cigarette smoke from a health viewpoint. Their words, not mine. The majority of these studies incriminate cigarette smoke from a health viewpoint. I mean, they may argue with the phraseology, but the message is clear. Cigarettes cause cancer, and they knew it. What did they know, and when did they know it? And what did they do about that knowledge? The evidence today, according to them, obviously, the amount of evidence accumulated to indict cigarette smoke as a health hazard, their word, not mine, is overwhelming. The evidence to indict cigarette smoke as a health hazard is overwhelming. The evidence challenging this indictment is scant. Scant. That brings us to 1963. Now, remember earlier in this opening statement, I talked about the use of the word propaganda? Not my word. Theirs. Nicotine's possible effect on obesity. Remember, we had one of the jurors who said, yeah, I smoked because I thought it cut down my appetite. Delivers to the industry what well may be its first effective instrument of propaganda. The first effective instrument of propaganda counter to that of the American Cancer Society. At all. At all meaning others, like the Surgeon General, the National Health Administration, the National Institute of Health. Damning cigarettes, as they have, as having a causal relationship to cancer of the lung. It is not in any degree responsive to that indictment. So what does that mean? Our propaganda saying this may help you cut down your appetite and lose weight doesn't counter the lung cancer argument. Hey, but it can help us out. There is real and compelling evidence of a cause and effect relation between smoking and cancer. Cardiovascular disorders also will probably be found related. Now, what was going on here is the Surgeon General in 1963 was preparing a report, the first of its kind, which said that cigarette smoke causes or is linked to lung cancer. It was a very famous Surgeon General's report. It got a lot of publicity. And so, in 1963, they knew it was coming out, you see. They knew it was coming out. And so what they're trying to do is prepare. Lay the groundwork for what? Disclosure? To disclose what they knew and when they knew? No. Lay the groundwork to fight, to deny, to keep people smoking. Well, and how were they doing that? How were they doing it? The 1963, we have this is actually the same record, which you'll see in evidence. We are then in the business of selling nicotine. Okay? So this is their internal documents. It was produced in lawsuits like this through the subpoena power of the courts. It was never meant to see the light of day. Because what they're saying is that we are in the business of selling nicotine, an addictive drug. But certain cigarettes have certain unattractive side effects. The evidence will suggest that they do. And what are the unattractive side effects? Number one, they cause or predispose to lung cancer. Yes, I guess it is an unattractive side effect. It causes people to die. A grisly, horrible death. But in reality, what they're doing is not selling cigarettes. They're selling nicotine, an addictive drug, to people who need the drug, to keep them smoking, to keep them going, to help them relapse. Okay. So, what happens? The Surgeon General's report comes out in 1964. Did this late last night. I thought it was before, but it was just done. So, the 1964 Surgeon General's report is a landmark. They're worried to death about it, as they should be. It would hurt their sales. Knowing that their products, the Surgeon General is going to say, the Surgeon General's, that nicotine and tobacco cause health-related diseases. So what do? Do they come forward to help the Surgeon General? Do they disclose? Do they do anything else? No. They're fine. And here's what they have with their public relations program. This is a memo, an internal memo from R.J. Reynolds. And it went from George Weissman, who was one of the vice presidents, to Joseph Coleman. And you'll see a video of this gentleman just after it took place. If he wasn't the CEO by that time, he was one of the real high-ranking officers. And the caption is, Public Relations Program. Not health. Public relations. Because that's what they've been doing. That was the plan they had, public relations. We must, in the near future, provide some answers which will give smokers a psychological crutch. A psychological crutch and a self-rationale to continue smoking. Think about that. Think about that. What the evidence shows right here. R.J. Reynolds, and they weren't alone on this. Philip Morris was doing the same thing. Other tobacco companies were doing the same thing. We're worried about providing smokers a psychological crutch so they could do what? Reassure them about the news of the Surgeon General's report. So they would do what? Continue to smoke. Their words, not mine. So they would continue to smoke, so they would continue to buy their products. So what did they do? Let's go on to our next one. I think we're pretty far behind. Their strategy was pretty clear. They were going to fight the Surgeon General, and here's the word. They had them right at the beginning. It's unproven. The link between cigarettes and cancer is unproven. There's no harm. Cigarettes don't hurt anybody. You can quit. It's a psychological crutch. You can quit. So let's talk about their strategy. What was their strategy? It was very simple. It was elegant in its simplicity. And as they later self-reported, they gave themselves an A+. They said they executed it and conducted it brilliantly. Well, this is what the evidence will show. Tobacco made it easy to start. There's no proven health risk. Drumbeat, the evidence will show. It's smooth, it's satisfying, it's cool, it's sophisticated. Movie stars use it. Athletes use it. Beautiful people use it. It's cool. It's suave. You can be off that. Make it as hard as possible to stop. Deny that there's any proof of addiction, even though they knew they were selling nicotine and drugs. Look for greater addictive effects. How do we make people more addicted? Enhance it so that you can inhale it deeper. Remember the bronchodilators? And control the nicotine levels. So you make sure your smoker gets his nicotine dose for the 8 or 10 puffs he has with each cigarette. And then finally, make it as easy as possible to start. And repeat. Anybody can quit at any time. And you'll hear this in this trial. That's their defense. Anybody can quit at any time. That was their defense in 1953. It was their defense in 1964. It is their defense in 2010 in front of you. Anybody can quit at any time. Charles Piendle just wasn't motivated. Anybody can quit. Provide a psychological force. Let's go on to the next one because it's key. All right, so we come I appreciate your indulgence, because this is important. It takes time to go through this. We have another document from 1961. Again, the same public relations plan. And this is even more revealing. This is a program from the Council for Tobacco Research, which was one of the fronts that was established by that emergency meeting in Christmas of 1953. And it was from Mr. Wakeman to Mr. Coleman. They were either chief executive officers or board leaders of the two major companies. And here's what they had to say. What is truth to one is false to another. CTR and the industry have publicly and frequently denied what others find as true. Well, that's not news to anybody here. Of course they deny it. Let's face it. Their words, not mine. We are interested in evidence. We're interested in evidence that we believe denies the allegations that cigarette smoking causes disease. So, they will tell you that they spent millions of dollars on research for the defenses. We worked hand in glove with the healthcare authorities. We established a program. We reduced tar. We waged a war on tar. But we know from their internal documents that this is what they were looking for. Let's face it, we're interested in evidence that we believe denies the allegations that cigarette smoking causes disease. What kind of science is that? You've already predetermined the outcome. They just want to get some evidence to support their position.
Your Honor, that's argumentative in form.
The evidence will show that.
Sustained, you can rephrase.
So, as they say, this is going to be difficult for us. If the CTR program is aimed in this direction, it's in effect trying to prove the negative, that cigarette smoking does not cause disease. Both lawyers and scientists will agree that this task is extremely difficult, if not impossible. They're lawyers. They're not these particular lawyers, but company lawyers and company scientists. Okay. So, what do they know about addiction? We're moving forward. We have now a 1972 document from Claude Teague. Mr. Teague was a research scientist for R.J. Reynolds. And he writes to the top brass, happily, for the tobacco industry, happily, nicotine is both habituating and unique. Habituating means addictive. Habituating and unique. If nicotine is the sine qua non of tobacco products, which means without which none, or the bottom line, the end-all be-all, if nicotine is the end-all be-all of tobacco products, and tobacco products are recognized as being attractive dosage forms of nicotine, then it's logical to design our products to sell it. We have deliberately played down the role of nicotine. Scientist to company. We have deliberately played down the role of nicotine. We must somehow convince him, the smoker, with wholly irrational reasons that he should try smoking. We need to convince him to try smoking, which is otherwise unpleasant, difficult to inhale, in the hope that he will for himself discover the real, quote, satisfactions obtainable, and the satisfactions of the nicotine, the addictions. 1978. Very few consumers are aware of the effects of nicotine. So you'll hear this. You've heard it from 1953. You'll hear it in 1972, in 61, in 78. You'll hear it today in this crowd. Very few consumers are aware of the effects of nicotine, i.e., its addictive nature, and that nicotine is a poison. Very few consumers. They were unaware of addiction. Okay? So what they'll say is, oh, there was some polling, People had heard about a link, there may be a link between cigarettes and cancer. Well, by golly, they sure did, the evidence will show. There were articles in the Reader's Digest, there were things on the radio, on TV. But what did tobacco do? They downplayed it. They fought it. They wanted a psychological crush. They wanted kids, teenagers, to start smoking, keep smoking, and not stop.
Your Honor. Sorry to hear that.
That's what we believe the evidence will show you.
Just rephrase it in that.
Okay, so how effective was the strategy? Well, let them be the judge. Oh, can you all see the board right here? Can you see this board? Okay. Oh, I see. Thank you. Okay. What they say is this: no one has ever become a cigarette smoker. We're back in 1972 by smoking cigarettes without nicotine. The cigarette should be the package. The product is nicotine. Again, Philip Morris. The cigarette's just the package. The product is nicotine. Think of the cigarette pack as a storage container for a day's supply of nicotine. A storage container for a day's supply of nicotine. Think of the cigarette as a dispenser for a dose unit of nicotine. A dispenser, a dose unit of nicotine. Okay. So, how was the strategy? How did they grade themselves? In 1972, about 20 years after the emergency Christmas Eve meeting, they said this. Their words, not mine. For nearly 20 years, 53 to 72, this industry has employed a single strategy to defend itself on three fronts: litigation, courtroom, politics, and opinion. While the strategy was brilliantly conceived and executed over the years, helping us win important battles, it is only fair to say that it is not intended to be a vehicle for victory. It's a holding strategy. For 20 years, their strategy, the plan they cooked up in the Plaza Hotel on Christmas Eve, was brilliantly conceived and executed. And how do we know that? We saw the rates of cigarette consumption. Despite the Surgeon General's report, despite health reports, they provided psychological crutches to people who were smokers. And with the Marlboro Man and the cool and the suave actors, actresses, the kind of people that young people would like to be like, with those images, again and again, they enticed younger smokers to smoke. It was brilliantly conceived, and it was. They were right about that. It was brilliantly conceived. It was brilliantly executed. It'll be executed in this quarter of the evidence will show. Okay. So what was the strategy? Well, the strategy was make sure that you have replacement smokers. These are the statistics. You could show that, Keith. The statistics are that 90% of all smokers start as teenagers. 90%. 89% of people who start smoking smoke by the time they're 18.
Objection, Your Honor. I think this is contrary to Your Honor's ruling.
I do not believe so, Your Honor.
This is number 48, Your Honor.
Counsel, first briefly.
It's a slide that shows the statistics on when people start smoking. Right, and it's not a slide to show that they're specifically targeting young smokers. It's a slide to show. Thank you. All right. Please, the board. So as I said, the statistics are most people, 90%, start before they're 18. So what happens is, and we'll hear this from Dr. Benowitz.
Your Honor, objection is still up.
Go ahead and take that down.
No, I allowed that.
Yeah, you allowed that.
Regarding the statistics, but not the others regarding the marketing efforts.
Okay.
Right, Your Honor, the label on it is argumentative and makes thank you.
Okay. So what happens is, as we've heard, is the teenagers' brains are not fully developed. They're mature. And so what happens is, if you start, as Charlie Piendle did, as a teenager or a very young teenager, you're more likely to become addicted because of the effect of nicotine on the young and immature brain. All right. So we've heard about the strategies that went forward. We saw the movie stars. We saw the people in power. We saw the beautiful people. We saw the sports figures. We saw actors and actresses galore. And that continued on. It continued on because maintaining a smoking market was the most important thing they could do. That was their sale. They were selling cigarettes, but in reality we know what they're selling. Dose, units of nicotine. Well, what makes it so difficult to quit? Because that's the defense. Hey, you can quit anytime. Why is it so difficult to quit? Let's show the relapse rate if we could. The relapse rates for smoking and smokers is dismal. It's awful. These are the relapse rates. Statistics. 85 to 90% of daily smokers are addicted. They need their nicotine. They've had the changes in their brain. When they quit, 95% or more of smokers who are trying to quit relapse. 5% or less actually stop. Which is why you heard during jury selection people would quit again and again and again. And they quit for a long period of time. A month, 2 months, 6 months, years. And then they would start again. The relapse rate is dismal. All right. So usually the statistics will show, and you'll hear from Dr. Benowitz and Dr. Cummings about this, that it takes multiple attempts usually. I mean, some people can never quit. Some people get a deadly diagnosis. They've got lung cancer, they've got heart disease, they can barely breathe. I've had a juror like that. And they continue to smoke. They can't quit. They know it's killing them. They can't quit. It's not that they're not motivated. It's not that they're weak-willed. It's not that they don't want to. It's that they can't quit. They can't quit. And so the result, more deaths per year in the United States in car wrecks, AIDS, murders, and suicide.
Under Williams, the State Farm due process, and you're eliminating abortion. That's argument.
Sustain this to the letter.
Well, we saw how many people died every year. And so where does Charlie fit in? We can show some photos. Charlie Piendle. Charlie Piendle. Born in 1941. He was the eldest of four brothers. Well, four kids, not all brothers. He was not a particularly large boy. He was, however, lightning fast and quick. He was quiet. He was stoic. He was kind. He was a good friend. He was also a terrific athlete. He was captain, co-captain of the track teams, and this is Charlie right there. Chief, can you focus in on Charlie? He was a senior representative in high school. He had quite a pompadour back then. Unfortunately for Charlie, it didn't last. He was, as I said, a member of the football team, and let's go down to the football team. This is Charlie. Back then they played in what was the team formation. There were two halfbacks and a fullback. Charlie was the left halfback, and his best friend Dave Cabral, who you'll hear testify, was the right hand back. Let's go on back to the next one. Here's Charlie, unfortunately being tackled. And this all comes from the yearbook. So, what happened is that Charlie and Dave were good friends. They had been friends since the time they were little boys. They played sports together. And unfortunately, they started smoking together. They started smoking, according to Dave, in the 6th or 7th grade. And according to Dave, they became hooked, whatever that means, by the way. They would smoke before school. They would smoke after school. Since they played sports, they'd smoke in the bleachers. The coach didn't like them to smoke, but they did it anyway. There was a candy store across the street from the school called Anthony's Candy Store. And you could buy a penny cigarette. For a penny, you'll get a cigarette and a match. And the boys and everybody else, you'll hear, went over there to smoke. And Charlie's parents smoked. And Charlie's brothers and sisters smoked. And Dave's parents smoked. And the teachers smoked. And the police officers smoked. The firemen smoked. And everybody smoked. It was what they did. Well, Charlie wanted to be a Marine, as I said, and he joined the Marine Corps. He joined at 18, and he was good enough as a football player to play on the Marine Corps football team. And then Charlie encountered some health adversity, and he, at a young age, developed what's called Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease, if you've heard of it or if you haven't, is a dreadful disease. It attacks primarily young people. It's an intestinal disorder, and your body, your immune system attacks you and does it. And so he had a major operation. They removed a lot of his colon when he was in the Marine Corps. He just didn't have the stamina to be a Marine. And to his dismay, he was discharged. Honorably, but he was discharged. He then went back. There's Charlie as a Marine. He then went back to Bridgeport, Connecticut, where he grew up. Went to Central High School. And he started to work in a cabinetry shop. Continued to smoke. Smoked 2 packs of Marlboros, according to Dave and others. And then he met Liz. Liz is younger than Charlie. She was about 8 or 9, maybe 10 years younger. Liz was from Bridgeport, too. She had been married in high school, and her husband, unfortunately, joined the Navy and was washed overboard during a storm and was killed. So she was a widow at a very, very young age, and she had a young son. She and Charlie met. They married. And Charlie treated her son Alan just as if he was her own son. Then they had a little girl named Tracy. You'll hear Tracy testify in this case. Shortly after they were married, Charlie had another attack of Crohn's disease. And this was bad. And so they went in and they removed his entire colon. But they left Charlie as a young man with a colostomy bag. He was not happy about that. But he took it like a man. He was stoic. He was kind. And he carried on. He tried to work, but he lost the ability to have the strength to do the kind of work he did. So he was ultimately disabled. Fortunately, he had been in the Marine Corps, so he had a disability income coming in. And Liz stuck by him. He was not the same man she married. He had a colostomy bag, but she married him for better or for worse, and stuck by him until the day he died. So, let's go back and talk about Charlie. Liz was hooked on cigarettes too. She started when she was 12. She smoked 2 packs a day. They tried to quit many times together. It didn't work. They would hide the ashtrays, take out the cigarettes, and they would quit. They would quit for a day and a half, and then they would relapse. And finally the day came when Charlie did it himself. He didn't tell Liz it was something he had to do by himself. He was quiet, he was stoic, and that's the kind of way he was. So he didn't tell her he was quitting. And he ultimately quit for 2 days and 3 days and 4 days. And after about
a little time, Liz found out and she was hurt. And she was upset with Charlie. Did he quit without her? Did he left her behind? But that was the only way he could quit after a long time. All right. So, Charlie, as I said, was diagnosed with cancer in 1995. He was 54 years old. Even with the diagnosis of cancer, Liz was unable to quit. Unable to quit. Even with that diagnosis with her husband dying, she, like so many people, was unable to kick that addiction. She did. She did ultimately. But she had far more relapses and a lot tougher time. All right. So, was his addiction a legal cause of his death? And the answer, of course, from the defendants is no. It's all his fault. He chose. He made a choice every day. From 1966, or whenever the warning labels came on the cigarette packs, he had to look at that thing every single day. Every single time he took a cigarette, he had to look at that. He made this choice. He was weak. He wasn't motivated. He could have quit early. All the time knowing that they were providing a psychological crutch for people who were buying their product. Not cigarettes, nicotine. The product that they recognized themselves. You've seen the documents. Let's go to the... Oh, wait, I can't do that. 1 second to catch up. The Tobacco Institute was one of these institutes started by the cigarette group. I'll tell you what, I can't find it. So there's a memo from this Tobacco Institute in 1980, shortly before Charlie quit. The lawyer reminds us, I'm told, that the entire matter of addiction is the most potent weapon a prosecuting attorney, me, Jack, say, David, bringing a case like that, can have in a lung cancer cigarette case. We can't defend continued smoking as free choice if the person was addicted. We can't defend if the person was addicted, which is why the evidence will show. But the defense is he chose. He wasn't motivated. He could have quit at any time. So, did addiction contribute to Charles's own responsibility? That jury instruction, I believe. All right. It's after our jury instruction. Well, it was a contributing cause, as the judge will say. One of the causes was Charlie Piendle. And he admits that claim. The other cause was everything that you just heard about and everything you'll see in terms of evidence and everything you'll hear from the witness stand. Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds. They kept him smoking. They prolonged his smoking. They helped him become addicted. They kept him smoking at high levels, and they provided a psychological crutch for Charlie and all the millions of Charlies around the country to keep on smoking. And they did that.
Objection, Your Honor. Violates due process, Williams, and your name.
That's my fair comment on what we expect the evidence to show. Okay. They comported with what they planned to do in 1953 in their brilliantly executed plan, a plan that you'll find when the evidence continues today. Cigarette sales went up. After 1953, they created doubt, and they made relapse so doggone easy. So doggone easy. So, we have some instructions from the court, and you've seen these, and if you decide that Charlie Piendle was addicted, they'll have help with this case. Because the Supreme Court of Florida has determined if you find Charlie was an Engle plaintiff, if you find he was addicted, then you consider these.
I'm not object, Your Honor. That is not a threshold question, just addiction. Legal causation as well.
Your Honor, this is my opening statement, what I expect.
Okay, well, sustained as it relates to not including the legal causation and overrule.
Okay. If you find Charlie, I'm sorry, your mind. Okay. If you find that Charlie was addicted, and that addiction was a legal cause of his death, if you find that, then the Supreme Court of Florida has given us findings. Smoking causes lung cancer, but that's not news to us, nor is it to tobacco. They knew it from the 1950s. Nicotine is addictive, but that's not news to us. And it's not news to tobacco. They knew it in the 1950s. They denied it, but they knew it. That the defendants, Reynolds and Morris, placed cigarettes on the market that were defective and unreasonably dangerous. So how were they unreasonable? I mean, the cigarette lights, it doesn't explode. How was it defective? Because when
I'm not object, Your Honor, to explaining these findings that violates directly one of your eliminate rulings. I believe it's number 12.
Your Honor, I do believe that I'm entitled to fair comment on this statement.
Well, I'll sustain and allow you to continue with reading the findings.
All right. Okay, and then the other findings are that the tobacco companies concealed material information, and we saw that. And what was the material information? Cigarettes were addictive, cigarettes cause disease, cigarettes cause lung cancer, and we are selling nicotine, among other things. And then that they agreed with others to omit information, hide information. And so those are the things that will help you in your deliberations. So, that brings us to damages, and if you could, bring us to our damage slide. And so the law of compensatory damages, and remember we have two different kinds of damages. The decision to determine punitive damages and actually award them as yours. You don't have to do that. It's your prerogative. But compensatory damages are damages that make people whole. To quote Liz Piendle back in the position she would have been in, had her husband not died an untimely death. Died at age 55. That was a long time ago. He died in 1996. He would still be in his late 60s. A long time ago. An untimely death. All right, so the defense has defenses. One of the defenses is that in this period of time since Charlie died, from 1996 to 2010, that Liz has dated. She has. Liz was engaged for a while. It didn't work out. She still mourns, seriously mourns. She's not in active grieving now. Gosh, I hope not, after all these years. She still mourns every day the untimely death of her husband. She has a scar. The evidence will show that never heals. And that's how it is when you're married forever. She took care of a man who was disabled. Morning, noon, night. And she lets him keep it. The punitive damages, if we decide to come back and make that decision, are damages, as we discussed earlier, to use the analogy that Jack Scarola used, are damages that teach wrongdoers a lesson. Not to compensate somebody, not to make them whole, but to teach them a lesson. To deter them from the kind of conduct that you'll see in this trial. To deter them from not coming clean. To deter them from concealing information from smokers. Particularly young smokers, people who don't know. You have to consider...
I'm sorry, counsel. I need to object to that. Reference to the underage smokers on a violation of the limited ruling specifically with respect to punitive damages.
Charlie Piendle was 12 or 13 years old.
I'll sustain at this point.
All right. So here are the things that you should consider. I mean, there may be others, but these are things to consider. What was the mindset of the company leaders? What did they know about addiction? When did they know about addiction? And what did they do with that knowledge? Did they help people out? Did they have the health of their customers forefront in their mind? Or did they have something else? What did they know about cancer? And when did they know it? Did they put greed ahead of safety? Did they put greed and avarice ahead of the safety of their customers? And if they did, how long did they do it? And what was the mindset? Did they do it accidentally? Did they run a stop sign by fiddling with the radio? Or did they do it intentionally? Did they brilliantly design? Did they brilliantly execute a plan that was hatched in the Plaza Hotel for 50 years? You should consider that. And then how long did this conduct, this willful conduct, go on? You may think of other questions, and those will be good ones. But those are ones that you might want to consider. Okay, and they have the defenses, which they're entitled to have. Of course, we've talked about some. He should have known the risks. He started as a young teen. He's 12 or 13. They denied all along, that people were addicted and that smoking causes cancer for 50 years. They do now, but back then, they didn't admit smoking caused cancer until, I believe, around 2000, long after Charlie Piendle died. For every year that Charlie Piendle smoked, from the time he started at 12 or 13 until the time he quit at 59, tobacco denied addiction and denied a link to lung cancer. In fact, in 1994, after he quit, the chief executive officers of the major tobacco companies went to Congress and they raised their right hand and swore to tell the truth.
Your Honor, violates your eliminate ruling. It is not connected at all with Mr. Piendle. He had stopped smoking 5 years before.
No, Your Honor, this is in furtherance.
Okay, which order is it?
This is the Nexus ruling, Your Honor, for punitive damages, which affected Williams at State Farm, and
It's ruling. It's order 18, Your Honor.
18, as well as ruling 18.
That's an order denying this motion.
Please review your order, Your Honor.
Just a moment. So they're going to sustain at this point.
Okay. All right. So, their defense is that everybody knew that they'll have some polls and they'll show that people had heard about a link between smoking and lung cancer, and well, they have. People had heard about it, that smoking may cause it, but what did tobacco do about it? They denied it. They fought it. They said it was unproven, untrue. There was no link. And then they advertised to give people a crutch so that those people who had been smoking, like Charlie, could continue to smoke. And then, they have a defense that Liz was at fault here. Liz was at fault here. Well, I'm not sure what the argument's going to be. Is that Liz smoked? She did. Liz was addicted too. That's quite often with husband and wife. They both smoke. So their defense is, I guess, by Liz being a victim too, that she's at fault, that she contributed. And when Charlie quit, when she got hurt and got upset with Charlie, that her addiction continued, and I guess that's their defense.
Sustained.
Well, anyway, you'll have to consider whether Liz Piendle was at fault in somehow causing her husband's death. Okay. And then, of course, they'll say that Charlie was never addicted, which is sort of the bottom line. They have a psychiatrist here from Palm Beach. He seems like a nice enough man, but he's never written about addiction. In fact, he's only published one article, once, in his entire career. And he's in his 60s, as opposed to, say, the 350 that Dr. Benowitz has published. You'll find that doctors, when they specialize, if they reach a certain level of expertise, can take an exam to become board certified. And that establishes, you'll hear, a minimum level of competence for doctors in whatever specialty, pulmonology, internal medicine, or psychiatry. You'll find that their expert, Dr. Marks, is certified in forensic testimony psychiatry, for which you don't take an exam. But he's not board certified in psychiatry. not board certified in psychiatry. He's from South Africa. He has a South African accent. You'll find that in order for a doctor to come to the United States, they have to take an exam. And they have to show a certain level of competence in English, and in clinical practice, and in science, the science of medicine. And you'll find that Dr. Marks failed the science part of the foreign entrance exam the first time he took it. And then you'll find he failed it again. And he agrees that addiction is real. That addiction to cigarettes is real. He agrees that the earlier you start, the harder it is to quit. He agrees that one of the classic signs of addiction is smoking first thing in the morning. Remember the nicotine withdrawal chart? You go to bed at night, all night long you're without nicotine. You wake up craving it. The more addicted you are, the evidence will show, the more you need a cigarette, a dose of nicotine early in the morning. The evidence will show that that is the most classic sign. He agrees with that. He just simply says that Charlie wasn't motivated enough. He didn't quit until he quit. I think you'll find under the evidence that that's sort of what we would call circular logic, that he only quit when he quit, and the other attempts don't count. But that's his opinion. He's entitled to it. All right. So, what did Charlie Piendle do to try to quit? We're almost done. Charlie Piendle, do we have that chart on that? I know I skipped around on you, and I'm sorry for that. Okay. Was Charlie addicted? Let's talk about it. He began smoking at 12 or 13, the most ripe time for addiction, you'll find. He smoked about 2 packs a day for 30 years. Actually, he smoked more than 30 years. Sometimes he smoked a pack and a half a day. It would vary. Between 45 and 60 pack years. He smoked everywhere. He smoked cigarettes first thing in the morning, as nicotine addicts do. He smoked everywhere except church. He liked church. He went to church every Sunday. They alternated between Liz, who was Episcopalian, her church, and his Catholic church. He smoked in bed before going to sleep, so he'd have the nicotine before he went, be in his system. His daughter was a talented gymnast, and she was busy in sports, and she'll tell you that he smoked at all the performances, all the breaks and all the performances. He'd be out there. As soon as she got out, he'd be out there fumbling with the cigarettes on the way to the car. He kept cigarettes in an ashtray right next to his bed. The classic footprints in the sand as evidence of addiction. He attempted to quit about 5 times. He tried gum, lozenges, straws, toothpicks. And this was before they had these wonder drugs we have now. Chantix, Blvd, the patch, even Nicorette. So what he did is he always kept a toothpick in his mouth when he was finally able to break that relapse cycle. All the time. He even went to sleep with a toothpick in his mouth. He always had his toothpick. That's what his friends will tell you. Charlie, after he quit, had a toothpick. It was Charlie and his toothpick. Toothpick and Charlie. He hid the ashtrays. They cut back. Tried not buying more cigarettes. And that's, what they did. Charlie was not big for, I don't even know if you heard of it, he didn't go to see a psychiatrist. Certainly didn't go to see Dr. Marks. He did it on his own. And he tried, and he quit. Tried, relapsed. Tried, quit. Tried, relapsed, and finally was able to break out of that cycle. And folks, that concludes our review of the evidence. And I know it's been long, it's 1 o'clock. It's been a long opening statement. There's a lot to cover, and I want to do this. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. And I know you'll give the defense that same time and attention. I appreciate it. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will take our lunch break. We'll be recessed for around 20 minutes, so we'll be in recess until 2:20. You can leave your notepads on the chair. Please remember the very important instruction not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else, and not to have any interaction with anyone associated with the case, the attorneys or the parties, should you see them over your lunch break. And we'll see you back at 2:20. Thank you very much.